Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a series of conversations that we make into a podcast and also a video series on the internet on the topic of designing better miniature games. My name is Mike Hutchinson. I have designed miniature games such as Pacific Command, A Billion Suns, and Perilous Tales. This is Glenn Ford. He's also a miniature games designer and has designed Pukeapocalypse and Borders and Black Flags and something with Jeeves and Wooster in it. Uh, the thing about miniature games, Glenn, is that they're
Yes,
really
like
complicated,
they
really
are.
hard to learn, and we've gotten quite familiar with learning miniature games, and it's fine. But sometimes you pick up a miniatures game and you look at it and you read it, and you're about 45 pages in, and you go, "Ah, how am I supposed to play this?" And then you realize that you have to build a whole list for it.
Mm.
And you need to understand the list building system, and then you have to figure out which scenario is going to play first, and there's loads of scenarios and you don't know which one's going to be the funnest and you want to have a fun time. And anyway, these lists I've built, these might not be fun, I don't know. So the question of the hour is, how do you ease the passage into your miniatures game? How do you make that first experience really good? What's your on ramp? What's your onboarding flow for your miniatures game? And I've got lots of thoughts on this.
Mm.
Before I go off into a massive rant, any opening thoughts from you, Glenn?
I mean, not super specifically. I know this is something you've gone through a few times. Um,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, the obvious things are what's going to be the starter scenario, what's going to be a sample list. The thing I always struggle with is
Mm.
quick start rule sets.
Yeah.
Because whenever I try to do a quick start rule set, I just rewrite the original rules with all of the conjunctions taken out.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just like
So yeah, so let me tell you the tale of A Billion Suns. So A Billion Suns is a spaceship game with lots of strange mechanics in it.
Hmm.
And I've said before, it's probably got a few too many strange mechanics, but there we go. And about I guess about 2 years after the book had come out, I it occurred to me that I should probably have a free downloadable um, quick start guide for it. And in a flash of inspiration, I sort of realized what the simplest expression of the game is. And actually, I thought I could maybe even fit it on a page and a half rather than even, 2 or 4 pages. And we talked about this in our episode a little bit before about pitching, where having understood the game a bit better, having had it out there in the wild, I finally figured out like which parts of the game I really wanted to sort of introduce to people because I wanted them to understand those parts of the game first. And so I wrote a little quick start guide that basically just gives you the parts of the game that I think are fun. And I found that to be kind of nice. I haven't got any actual data about whether it's been effective, but it felt good to be able to give somebody a thing and say, look, this will take you 20 minutes. And by the end of this 20 minutes, you will understand the basics of this game. And, gentle listener is saying, but I had a piece of paper in my Warhammer 40,000 second edition box set that did exactly this. I had to move an orc 4 inches towards a space marine, and then a space marine bapped him on the head, and I had to roll a d6 or whatever. And I think they broadly speaking, were doing a really good job back then in the mid 90s of figuring out there's a couple of like core concepts for your game, whatever it is, that you want to get people familiar with. And there's a bunch of scaffolding that's going to get in the way of understanding that. Um,
Hmm.
and we've had our rant, and we'll probably have another rant soon about how your skirmish game's probably the same as everyone else's skirmish game. And so explaining all the scaffolding isn't actually that interesting. What's interesting is tell me what's different and tell me what to get excited about. So quick start guides, I think, are a fun thing that I've been experimenting with. And for the most recent couple of games, Space Kits does have a quick start guide because I thought I could boil down the core mechanics of that game to 4 pages and give you pretty much everything that I thought was critically fun about that game. And then people are like, well, what else is in the rule book? Because when I give it to them at shows, I'm like, here's the complete game, and they're like, okay, what's in the rule book then? Well,
Hmm.
everything else, all of the options, all the weapons, all the vehicles, blah blah blah, all the scenarios. Um, and with Pacific Command, I haven't done a quick start rule thing. And that's because I'm sort of tackling that in a slightly different direction. And genuinely, I just don't think I can express that game briefly enough to give you everything that makes it fun. Because there's
Mm.
just a little bit too much scaffolding that I need to put in place for that. So I'm not saying quick start guides are essential, but they have, for the games where I've been able to like distill down the fun to a really slimline package, um, that's really good. And I think I'm getting better at identifying what that is as I get more experienced.
Yeah, it's weird to be honest. Like the things that different players need with different games. Like we were recently at UKGE, and that's often an interesting experience because there's a real mix of miniatures gamers, board gamers, etc., etc. And
Hmm.
a guy came by and he was looking at Gaslands, and he was like, "Well, this seems incredibly complex and difficult to understand, and like hard to follow," because he's looking at however many pages the Gaslands rule book is, 130 odd, I think. And if you are not a miniatures gamer, that looks like an incredibly intimidating rulebook. And I had this real sort of moment of like, I can totally teach it somebody all the rules of Gaslands in about a minute, you
Mm.
know. Um, and it's sort of trying to explain one of the problems is that movement in Gaslands is incredibly simple. Final position and all the possible interactions that you could have during a movement, which you do not need to understand like 99% of the time. You don't need to know like what happens when you harpoon somebody up a ramp in all but like one in every million
No one knows.
games. One in every million games. It's just not useful. It's just not helpful. And there's even interactions in the book where it's, okay, this needs more explanation, but like one person in a million is going to need it, and it's just not worth putting that paragraph in there. Um, and what different people consider a heavy and difficult to get into and get introduced to game varies so heavily, and like what one person needs and the next person doesn't. I think A Billion Suns is the sort of the premium example of a game that is, it doesn't have an on ramp, it has an on brick wall. It's so obtuse to sort of get your first game out with it. Whereas something like Hobgoblin is very forgiving because it's so miniatures agnostic. Because the difficult thing for something like Hobgoblin is, so I've got to write a list and I've got
That's
to get
right.
a load of minis, and then those minis might not work very well. And the selling point of Hobgoblin is, well, then yeah, you just change the rules for those minis. It's fine. It doesn't matter. Um,
Yeah, reduces the risk of sort of buying into the game, but it doesn't have a set of like example lists for you to learn what a hobgoblin army looks like.
mm,
Whereas, so Pacific Command, I did include, and I did this in the first edition of Gaslands actually, and it went horribly wrong, and I really regretted it. And so I'd been a bit leery about putting example lists in games for a hot second. But in Pacific Command, I just decided, oh, sorry.
no, no, no. I mean, finish what you were saying because I was just going to make a point about.
Yeah, in Pacific Command, I thought that like I, I think that there is list building, and I think that the list building is very far from the like central core uh of what the game is about. The game is about the fog of war bluffing. And so in order to get you from zero to pushing some chips forward and going, haha, you don't know where my my fleet carrier is, I wanted to give you an exact set of task force, like two identical lists, and I wanted to give you an exact thing of like how to stack your chips. If you're not confident about what to do, just stack them like this, then start pushing them together, and after 10 minutes you'll be cackling madly and wishing that you'd hidden your carriers in different task forces and different stacks and stuff, and now you're playing the game.
And it's tricky because what I was going to say before is sometimes I sometimes look through some rule books, and what they have are like little tactical hint sections where they tell
Mm.
you what the sort of the clever move here is and what the sort of interesting interaction is. And I always feel like well, part of the fun is discovering that, isn't it? I want to find that interaction and think that other people maybe aren't aware of it, you know. And God forbid I'm the only person who reads the rule book at any given table, and so you've just basically given me a leg up over everybody else. And
Mm.
the thing with like handing people sort of set example lists is it can sometimes rob people of a bit of that sort of passage of discovery.
Yeah.
um and so it's like I think one thing that's nice, and I think that, you know,
But it is also like a really it's a really firm transferal of my imagination of the game into your conception of the game, which can
yeah,
be done with like pictures of miniatures and stuff as
well,
well.
it's yeah, because it's tricky because like you want to give people a list that will show off the game in its sort of in its funnest form. You also want to give them a list that is generic enough that they feel like they haven't had like a lot of the fun spoiled by
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
having a lot of the discovery given to them. And so I think all of this is part of the reason that, like, you know, quick start forces tend to be really, really, really stripped down. So it's like I can give you like one or two units that have like a load of cool stuff in them, but obviously I haven't, you know, like shown you the interactions and the synergies, because you're meant to have like five or six, 7 or 8 units on the tabletop. So you're just learning the steps of going through a game. Um, and it can be tricky because, again, you want to sort of get straight to the thing that is the point of your game. So like Pukeapocalypse has a, you know, my first Pukeapocalypse scenario, which is all about shoving people off of the lovely thing. There's a lovely thing in the middle of the table, and whoever's standing on the lovely thing at the end of a round wins. So it's a game all about shoving each other around, which is, you know, getting people to realize that you don't just puke on people to dump tokens on them, but you use it to push people around.
And
Um,
do you tell them just used 5 vanilla scumbags? Don't worry about any special rules or stuff.
I mean, you know, the initial team building of Pukeapocalypse when you play the full version is to roll a single dice, and that's what your scumbags are, and they each have one special rule that they all share. I think I'd say the initial thing is just pretend they haven't got any abilities, but
Mm.
it's still that. So it doesn't, the game doesn't really have list building anyway. So there's no sort of worry about not teaching people that, because it's sort of entirely randomly generated.
Yeah, I played a game of Forbidden Psalm recently, and that tackles the problem in a slightly different way, which I think is also fun, which is having random gangs. Like
Mm.
that's a um it's like it's a floor lowering but also a ceiling lowering thing, where like it's super easy to walk into that game. How do we get started? Well, we just roll up our gangs randomly, um a bit like in Puke there. It's got more granularity because it's a bit more like sort of Souls like role-playing y influenced,
Mm.
and that means that I don't have to learn about list building, and also I've immediately got like, ooh, some fun stuff that's mine, and I didn't have to make any decisions. The game just barfed it onto me, but now I can get excited about that, and that lets a skirmish game that's sort of otherwise just a sort of simple Frostgrave thing, like have a bunch of sort of fun loveliness that I immediately want to engage with because it just barfed up some gemstones for me.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with a game like that, a lot of the point of the discovery of the game is finding out what my new widget actually
Mm.
does. It's like I can read the rules, but that's not the same as poking somebody with it and watching them dance a jig or whatever the hell the thing does in that particular situation. And so with a game, I think that's very discovery driven in that way, you can
Mm.
have much less of an on ramp, because what you really want to do is dump a bunch of like special rules on somebody and then go and now just push them around and try and pull the levers and see what happens when you pull them.
Yeah, and that's a great point actually, and clarifies something that I was thinking about, which is that like in Forbidden Psalm you make treasure rolls during the game, so you're like discovering items as the game unfolds, and that's because yeah, absolutely now the more I think about it, the more Forbidden Psalm is definitely a game about discovering what these little crackerjacks do.
Yeah.
And
And
that's why
so
there's loads of them, and they get barfed at you at random intervals.
yeah, so I
Um,
think like a quick start for Forbidden Psalm almost makes no sense because it's sort of say,
no, and the system is as quick starty as it can kind of be anyway. It's a nice simple system, and
mm,
then um, the thing about that conversation that I have at game conventions when I hand people a quick start guide and they go, well, what's the rule book then? And the answer is content. The rule book is content. Like the system is simple, that's a positive. There is lots of content, that's also a positive, and those two things can both be true. And so I think that being handed a thick rule book and like, no, to play, this is what like playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle felt a bit more like. It was like there's a whole thick rule book, and I have to read 12 chapters truly to understand how the game works. Whereas, Age of Sigmar tried to say, well, here's 4 pages and the system is simple and then the content will be complicated.
yeah, and I think that's one thing that's sometimes a little ironic with quick start guides for miniatures games, particularly. It's like because I am very experienced in miniatures games, I know that if you hand me a 2-page quick start sort of rule set, well, what the difference is that this is going to let me move across the floor. And in the main thing, I can like grapple up a building and jump over a car and backflip through but you're just going to go, okay, well, here's the movement thing. And you're going to give everybody a basic rifle in your quick start. And in the main rules, there's going to be a quantum laser nose tickler or whatever the hell the list of 5 pages of weapons are, and there's going to be 10 pages of abilities, and there's going to be multiple factions, and there's going to be like 6 different scenarios in a campaign system. And so it doesn't in any way confuse me that the quick start is 2 pages and the book is 100 pages. But then I don't really need a quick start guide because I know these sorts of games already. And if you give me like a 1 paragraph pitch, I probably understand whether that game's for me or not. And I kind of want to learn it properly before playing it.
I
Um,
see. Okay, yeah.
and so
So
it's
that,
like,
yeah, so that might be onboarding tools specific to different kinds of players or levels of experience.
well, it's what,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because like, so the reason, the reason I have a quick start guide for A Billion Suns, the reason I have one for Space Kits, the reason I would like to have one in the future for uh Gaslands is that like I think the core system is interesting enough that it's worth playing, it's worth sampling that, and that I think that particularly with Space Kits, like it's that moment where sure you might understand the game and want to buy the rule book, but you're also the taste maker, and then there are some other people around you who are less confident or less interested or less adventurous, and the quick start guide is also kind of a non-threatening invitation that you can
hmm,
use to gather players.
I think there's possibly a difference between A Billion Suns. The A Billion Suns quick start guide is something that I want everybody who owns the A Billion Suns rulebook to own, and for that to be their first experience of the
Got it,
game
yeah.
before playing it. The Space Kits quick start guide is something that I want people to give to their friends who don't own the book, and I want to give to people at conventions when they haven't got the book to sort of go away and play it and then sort of come back for it. Because like I feel like the with Space Kits, I can totally put that game across in like a 30-second pitch.
Hmm.
And the quick start guide is like actually experiencing that 30-second pitch in what is technically a game. But if you're not on board after the 30-second pitch, you're not really going to be on board like at any point. Either you think stacking dice up and then falling over drunk is hilarious, or you don't. And
Hmm.
I'm really not going to sort of get you round. If you don't like dexterity games, you're not going to suddenly start liking them.
Yeah.
Whereas with A Billion Suns, I genuinely kind of need you to play a game of it, and I genuinely need you to play a game of it that isn't going to melt your face, before you even get a single model out.
Yeah.
So I think they're very different. Like I don't think of the Space Kits quick start guide as on ramping in the same way as I think of the A Billion Suns quick start guide, if you know what I mean. Like
I see what you're reaching for there. I suppose what's interesting is that now I think about the provenance of the A Billion Suns Quick Start Guide. I think I learnt what that needed to be by demoing the game
Hmm.
and realizing how I could explain what was cool about that game in 15 minutes. But I had to demonstrate it, and then I could show people what it was. And by going through that, I kind of realized what it was that I wanted to explain. Um, But I don't know. I mean, like in A Billion Sun, sorry, in Space Gits, like if people just play the quick start guide as their first game, even after they bought the rule book, because it's going to be at the beginning of it, like that's just great. Like
Hmm.
it's got enough weird things that like just getting your head around moving and throwing rock paper scissors is enough for your first game. But like, and in that, like, I even give you the basic lists because it's just you get three orcs, they're holding, a sausage and a gun. It's fine.
Yeah, but it's like I feel like if someone gets Space Gits and reads the full rules of Space Gits, they're gonna have a much better idea of what they need to do, you know, and what they need to put on the tabletop than if they read the rule book of A Billion Suns. It's
Yeah,
like I,
yeah, that's true.
you
I
know,
mean,
I
it might just be the case that A Billion Suns needs a quick start guide more than many other miniatures games. It
well,
might be identifying.
I think Space Gits in A Billion Suns are as far down the that particular continuum as two games can realistically be. I think like A Billion Suns absolutely needs that quick start guide and that first. And I think there's a lot of sort of gradations between those two. I think like, I think Hobgoblin lands somewhere in between those two poles.
It's interesting here because we sort of frame this conversation as onboarding to your miniatures game. With I had the assumption that like someone has bought the book and they want to come on board, but of course, like the onboarding funnel begins when they first hear the pitch for your game, whether they've seen it online or we've shouted at you over the booth, and then it might continue to downloading the first free resource, or it might continue to playing the first game with a friend because you're curious about it. And so it's interesting because like the quick start guide, the starting forces, and as we're about to get to in a moment, like the opening scenario selection, those things could be something that you discover yourself. They could be something that you're introduced to. And they may all come before you purchase the game and
Yeah,
may influence that purchase.
I think it's very significant that the A Billion Suns Quick Start Guide came into existence after A Billion Suns the book, and the Space Gits Quick Start Guide has been given out to people when the book does not exist. And I've had people like popping up on Instagram after a UKGE going like, "Oh, where can I buy the Orc game?" Well, you can't. You can't. You've just opened the Pledge Manager, so the pledge manager for Space Kits is just open, so you can now late
You
play.
now can buy it theoretically. Yeah.
You can now future buy it, but
Hmm.
you could not buy it, and that Space Kits sort of flyer is the only way people could physically have it. And I do wonder if if it were the other way round and Space Kits were already out as a book, and you had written Space Kits as your second game from Osprey, whether you would have ever bothered doing a quick start guide for it. Because, like I say, I'm pretty sure I can shout Space Kits to you from across a room, and you'll get, the game played well enough to have the basic joy of it sort of available. And I think it's significant again with like Pacific Command, where the sort of quick start thing you were handing out to people for Pacific Command was these force lists and a quick
Hmm.
reference, because the point of, like you say, the point of Pacific Command is I want you to have these stacks of chips where things are hidden and he doesn't know where they're hidden, and you to experience that with the other person. And as soon as you've done that, I don't really care if you're playing the game properly or you understand the rules or whatever, because as soon as you look at those chips and you look at his chips, you go, that's it. That's all I really need. And
Hmm.
you'll dig down and you'll figure the game out at that point. I think a lot of it is like where that moment comes where you've either won the person's either on side or they're never going to be. You know what I mean? And like with
Maybe. So yes, I agree with all that, and I think part of this onboarding funnel is also not fumbling the ball
mm,
later on. So you could fumble the ball, like you could pitch space kits and yeah, you could pitch your game successfully. You could get somebody to pick up your game, and then you could fumble it in a number of ways, and like poorly writing the rule book or poorly
mm,
organizing the rule book is an easy way to drop the ball here. But another way that you could do it, and I think A Billion Suns does fumble the ball at this point, is you could make figuring out how to have fun in your first game as obtuse and opaque as possible. So there's a procedural scenario system in A Billion Suns that says, here's some objectives, and it will spew three objectives out, and the objectives are all quite complicated. And then
mm,
you've got the complexity of the basic structure of the game and the economic engine and everything, and all of that comes together to an absolutely face melting first experience which only the brave survive. God bless you if you are listening, and you have played a third game of Billion Suns. You are a champion among wargamers. And in Gaslands, like already knew how to do this because there's a little thing called Street Race in Gaslands that was basically just our demo setup. And it's like there's a small track with a couple of gates. You get at exactly this list, and you go brum brum, and it ends in about half an hour. And now
mm,
that Gaslands is fun. And so we've talked about this before, that like one of the real challenges of designing miniature games is your total lack of control over
mm,
what the game looks like, feels like, how it is experienced. Like if I make a casual mobile game, I have utter control over everything about the game other than what is going into your nose from whatever like public transport you're going on. Total control. Whereas a miniature
mm,
game, like I don't know what the miniatures are, I don't know how they're mounted, I don't know what the terrain is, I can't be certain that you're even playing with the correct size of board, all this kind of stuff. And um, even setting aside the fact that these games are like uh dyed in the wool DIY thing, so you'll probably be messing with the rules and assuming that you can take out pinning, even though it's core to Necromunda. Um, so writing a scenario zero, which provides a lot of controls and guidelines to like bring you to the trough of fun and invite you to drink deeply, I think is really important. And I
mm.
did it, I think, quite well with Space Kits, and then absolutely shit the bed with A Billion Suns, and have been trying to do it. Like, funnily enough, with Space Kits, I've gone like insanely the other way. There is only one way to play, and that is the fun way. And
Mm.
like, where are all the scenarios? They're coming. Don't worry about it. This is the one. This is fun already. You can have an enormous amount of fun just doing this one thing.
Mm,
Um, whereas Pacific Command, um, has a little bit of a sort of softer middle point where it says, look, I'm going to show you what the forces are. I'm going to tell you to play the midway scenario. So
mm,
go flick to that page, play that scenario because it's a good shape for learning how the game looks without too much like component overhead or like any additional rules faffing. And so I think that as part of your onboarding, like thinking about what that actual first game is going to be like, even having got through the mental and the physical preparation for the game, like what's that
mm.
actual first game going to be, is really important.
Yeah, I think the simplest thing to sort of improve your onboarding is don't write a billion sons because
Yeah, that's the generalized lesson here.
yeah, that's a good. Well, because a billion sons is the thing that does best is two things. One is like a massive epic like galaxy spanning narrative,
Mm.
which is really like hard to give people without making them like put loads of stuff down. And the other is that moment when like 47 different interlocking systems all click together in your head at once and you see the matrix and you go, fucking hell, I can see the face of
I'm spaceship
God.
Jesus.
You know, which you're obviously incredibly hard to give somebody that in a sort of a quick start version of the game. Um,
Mm.
and it's very satisfying when it happens. But I tend to sort of, we've talked about this a few times. I have very clear sort of pitches and deliveries for everything that we do at conventions. With a billion suns, I just kind of jump around and wave my arms about and shout about, like, honest to God, it's amazing when you get there, but I genuinely can't promise you that you ever will.
Yeah.
It's just not, it's just never going to be for everybody.
And so I think that like it's fine to have a table of 6 scenarios in your book and a d6 to choose them. But if there's one or two of those scenarios that you haven't play tested as much and you're not that confident about, and really they're kind of like a second or a third scenario once you've got the basic game down, because they introduce some weird stuff that sort of unbalances the basic mechanics. Like, are you telling the player, don't roll on this table, first play, Rain of Fire, and do that and then have a good time? I
Yeah.
actually can't remember I can't remember off the top of my head if Hobgoblin does say play the battle line scenario, because I just assume everybody will, and then they'll figure out if they want to do a scenario.
Yeah, I think of the thing the Hobgoblin is, you're gonna have to pull teeth to get people to play anything other than the battle line scenario. So I don't think you mention it. I think you just take that as read. But
Yeah,
yeah,
speaking of 90s Games Workshop, so we played Strontium Dog a little while back, and
Mhm.
that in the little box set from Warlord came with a little scenario pamphlet, and it was like,
Mm.
build the terrain, and then here are 3 scenarios that like build your rules awareness, and then there was a fourth scenario which wasn't a quick start scenario, it wasn't like a truncated one, it was just like, and here's your first solid game. So we ignored the first 3 and we went, because we're like, we know how miniature games work, and we went straight to the like, you know, gunfight at the OK Corral scenario, and we had a perfectly delightful time. And the game
Mm.
did all the things that we hoped it would do from futuristic gunfighter shoots mutants. And so I think that was good, because it had like a separate piece of paper that was like, read this before tearing the rest of the game open.
Yeah, I think like boxed games, generally board games, a lot of them, especially the more complex ones, have like a little sheet on the top when you open the box up that says read me first.
Mm,
And the really good ones guide you through the unboxing of the game and the reboxing of it, as well as then telling you where to go amongst the like 3 different rules pamphlets are in the box that will guide you depending on your awareness of different games and things. I think like if you've got the space and the time for it to give people um multiple scenarios to lead them through stages of the game, I think that can be a good thing. I think the issue is that like with a boxed game, the level of commitment somebody has made, they're not going to get bored and wander off by before playing like at least 4 scenarios. With a miniatures agnostic rule book, if the first scenario they play, which is a very sort of gentle introductory thing, doesn't give them a reason to come back to the second scenario, it's very easy to lose people with an overly sort of milk toast first touch of the game. I think it's much more important with miniatures agnostic games, because people's buy-in is often much lower, to get to the thing much more quickly. Like, because for me, like, a first scenario and a first experience and a quick start thing is like giving people a set of steps to get them to the thing that they're going to go, right, yeah, I get it now, as
mm,
quickly as you humanly possibly can.
yeah.
And you can give yourself a huge amount of benefit when you're right. You know, the thing with Space Skits is that you've inherently written a system where the thing is really, really quick to get to.
Yeah.
So as soon as you get the idea of stacking the dice up and it falling over and the alt falling over, that's kind of the thing, and we can do it. But if you find Jenga pleasurable or not, you know what I mean, or
Yeah.
Rhino Hero, whatever it happens to be, and the further away the thing is from the person's first experience of like thinking about playing your game, the more heavy lifting your onboarding has to do. And it's why I'm talking, a billion suns is as furthest, like the thing
Yeah.
is as far away as
So
possible.
there's a really interesting thing that's going on right now, and I don't know what it is, but like lots of people are making miniature agnostic mech games. There's just a sudden rash of them.
Mm.
And I got 2 pictures miniature agnostic mech folks at UKGE. There's that Flames of Orion Kickstarter just finished like this week. But like there's a goodly number of mech games going on in the Rule of Carnage Discord. And there are there are more besides. And I suppose like one of the things about a like one common thread that I have detected is that um there's a sensation that like the selling point is you get to play with mechs, and
Mm,
for a miniature agnostic game it's like cool, I can already play with mechs. Like I could play Adeptus Titanicus, I could play Heavy Gear, I could play Battletech. Like I can play with mechs. Like mechs isn't the selling point. Like
mm,
go somewhere else with this pitch. Like lead me somewhere else with this pitch. And so yeah, like I think what you're saying there is really right, is that miniature agnostic games, my like instinct with miniature agnostic games is I want to give you a cool system. And that's because I don't control like kind of the most important part of the content, which is the miniatures that you're going to enjoy and be participating with on the table. So if I
mm,
haven't got that, I better really provide something like systemically interesting. And providing a deep content interlocking kind of content thing where I have to learn a lot about the game in order to understand like where the depth of it, like 40k can do that because it's got a miniatures behemoth behind it. Malifaux can do that because it's got loads of really characterful models, and I want the model in my life before I really care what
mm,
it does, or at least for the first 20 models I buy, maybe.
mm.
Whereas I completely agree, if it's miniature agnostic and it's leaning into like, well, there's a list building complexity that you is emergent and you discover over time. It's like you haven't got that time.
Mm.
Time doesn't exist.
Yeah,
No one's cutting down to that level of stuff unless the game is like, beautiful, I love it. It's immediately delicious to me because I've got
yeah,
20 other miniature agnostic, fantasy or mech or sci-fi battle games that I could choose from. It's got to do
yeah,
something
yeah,
now.
yeah. I think for
This
miniatures
is slightly
agnostic.
turning into a like don't make a shit skirmish game rant, but whatever.
No, I mean,
If there's
well, the thing
anything that
is,
this channel ought to be doing more of, it's that.
the thing is, you can make a really good skirmish game that is good because it has like a massive amount of depth and richness, and it's good because you're going to want to play 50 games of it, and that is not a bad skirmish game.
Yeah.
It's a bad skirmish game that anybody's going to get anything out of because you need them to play 2 games of it before they're going to play 50 games of it.
Mm.
And for a miniatures agnostic, independent, indie skirmish game, getting them to play 2 games of it means it having the thing which is not depth and complexity in list building.
Hmm.
You can have it, and that's lovely, and that will get people playing the 10th, 20th, 30th, and 40th game, but it is not going to get them playing their second game. And the
Hmm.
second game is kind of the hardest game to get them to play of a game like this. And the second game, you're going to get them to play with the thing, the thing that you told me on the pitch, the thing that I understood within 5 minutes of opening the rule book, the
Hmm.
thing that led me to read all the rest of the rules so that I could understand how to achieve the thing. And then if in the first game the thing happens and was satisfying, I will play the second game. And then you can offer me list building and depth and 90 million scenarios and a campaign system and all
Hmm.
those sorts of things. And you can keep me playing for the 10th, 20th, 30th, 40th, and 50th game, but it's game 2 that your onboarding needs to get people to, and it's game
Yeah, and I think
that
that's really interesting framing, which I completely agree with, and makes me think that like the thing that you've described there, and I think that I'm most passionate about, I could describe as like the intrinsic enjoyment of that first game carries me into the second game. I was offered a I was offered a particular kind of experience and it delivered on that experience, and I'm excited to have that experience again. There is an extrinsic way of motivating game two, and that is to like build your campaign system uh, in or your, some kind of evolution of your list where it's like, okay, I randomly rolled up my gang, or we got the starting gang, and the starting gang wasn't very interesting, but at the end of the first game, like bam, something interesting happens. Like, okay, so now my scumbags have got like some stuff that they can maybe carry into the next, or my Mordheim guys have, one of them's got his leg blown off. Okay, now I'm interested in the game. So I do think there's also, as lot there are a number of games that are trying to trade on the fact that, okay, the game experience is kind of good, but the inter-game experience is the thing that is really fun and that you want to continue to engage with, which, as we've talked about with list building maybe being the core of Warhammer, that makes those games potentially about the post-game roles, and the game itself is a bit like a game of Warhammer insofar as it's sort of playing second fiddle to the main event.
Yeah, and you can achieve that, but equally there are quite a few games who do that quite well, and I think you still come for me.
Mm.
I still come back to that thing of like, okay, you've got a lovely campaign system. Well, I've got Forbidden Psalm, I've got Frostgrave, I've got options for that. What's the other thing? It's like, don't tell me that it's mechs are nice, and some people like mechs or don't like mechs. What do your mechs do? Can I throw a building at somebody? What's your over? Is there an interesting overheating system? Is there an interesting resource going on? What's the thing that actually it's not good. It's like you say, it's not good enough to offer me the opportunity to play with mechs. You can't really like hold a miniature up to me and go, "Oh, you get to play with this." It's like, if I want to play with that, I'll play with that.
Hmm.
I'm capable of like choosing my own toys. You need to sort of give me the thing that's going to be the thing that I'm actually there for. Yes.
There's so much more to say on this topic that
Hmm.
we're not going to be able to explore. I mean, I think there's like a whole sort of softer set of things about the onboarding, which is, about how you're evoking the theme and the vibe, and how you're like bringing people to the table and getting excited. And I think that a lot of games end up attracting players successfully because, they're getting people excited about the sort of theater of the mind thing, and what kind of stuff, what kind of world they want to play in. Glenn and I are, I think, when we come together, we end up talking much more about, the more formal elements of the games that we design, even though we both try really hard to bring, vibes and settings and good times in that regard. But I think, like, I just want to put a pin in the fact that there's like a whole separate conversation about how that softer stuff could come into play in order to get people across the threshold, and then into that second all important second game. But yeah, I think quick start rules set up, starting forces, choosing your best scenario, and then the clarity of the pitch slash delivering on the thing that the game is trying to do that's new. And I think all of these are absolutely critical to getting your players onboarded, and playing that second and third game.
Absolutely. And I'm sort of having this conversation. I'm imagining the sort of the pamphlets and cards that we hand out at conventions, but there's a whole conversation to be had about the layout of your rule book and how it helps onboard people, and when do you give them the my first scenario version of the game.
When do you put list building?
Where do you put this? Where do you give them the rules and then give them the quick start rules, or do you give them the quick start rules and then give them the rules? It's yeah, but that's a conversation for another day. For now, if you've been through a sort of quick start rules, a quick start scenario, wherever it happens to be, an onboarding process of a particular game that you thought was like really good, maybe it was the best game you ever played of that particular system, swing down to the comment sections, let us know which system it was, what was so satisfying about it. If you've had a really horrible onboarding process in a game, swing down in the comment section and tell us it was a billion suns. Either way, hit the like and subscribe buttons whilst you're down there. Check out the links section where there's links across to the various places you can buy our games, along with links across to our Patreons where you can support the channel directly. And there is a link across to our Discord, where there are a range of people who would like you to tell them how they are not onboarding you onto their game, and would maybe tell you a good way of onboarding them onto yours. Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, clear as mud.
Yep, absolutely. For now, though, I think it's going to be a thank you and goodbye for this episode of Rule of Carnage. So, thank you and goodbye. Bye bye.
Godspeed.